Next item is unfinished business. We move into new business, and tonight we'll hear about the starting of three pretty good size elements tonight. Comprehensive plan update, housing element briefing, and Amber Piona is here. Amber, take it away.
Hi, good evening. Let me share my screen. And come on. There we go. So good evening, Planning Commissioners. Amber Piona, Senior Planner with PDS. I'm here tonight to give you a briefing on, it's part of our continuing series on the comprehensive plan update, and this is on the housing element. So the purpose of this briefing is to provide an overview of the amendments to the housing element, to summarize public comments received to date. This is also an opportunity for commissioners to ask questions and provide feedback. Also, as a note, the detailed staff report was provided in advance of this this briefing. And please note public comment or questions. You know, that's the note we have about the comment questions for, excuse me, the update. So the housing element is one of the GMA mandatory elements, and it presents the housing strategy for the county. And the so housing and housing affordability is something that has been more and more of a concern. And so the legislature, state legislature in 2021 passed House Bill 1220, which substantially changed the GMA planning goal for housing. Before we were encouraging affordable housing. Now we are required to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments. So it got beefed up. And there was also a substantial amount of changes to the housing element requirements. So the majority of the amendments that we're making to the housing element are to implement those changes. So what I'm going to do, since 1220 goes through, the changes are such a big part of the element, I'm just going to go through how, for all of the sections in the RCW here, it's 36, 70A, 0702, and then how the housing element meets those. So this first section here, A, this is the inventory and analysis of existing and projected housing needs that identifies the number of housing units necessary to manage projected growth as provided by the Department of Commerce. And this is including, now we're looking at units for moderate, low, very low, and extremely low income households. And those are specific terms that come to us from HUD, and they're related to they're related to the area median income. I can discuss it more in a little bit, as well as emergency housing, emergency shelters, and permanent supportive households. Okay, so the full analysis here, the inventory analysis, is actually part of another document, the Housing Characteristics and Needs in Snohomish County report that's done through Snohomish County Tomorrow. And this will be an appendix to the comprehensive plan because it is a sizable report. And then there's amendments proposed to the narrative text that includes the Snohomish County Tomorrow adopted housing need allocation for the unincorporated Snohomish County by income level, as well as for emergency housing. So there's a table in the narrative that talks about that, but I've also got this here. This is actually from the Housing Characteristics and Needs report. This is the Snohomish County unincorporated permanent housing needs by income level. So for 2020 to 2044. So the countywide need for projected need for 2044 was given to us by Commerce, and it's based on our growth targets. And then through the Snohomish County Tomorrow process, we allocated that need to all the individual jurisdictions. And again, it's based on growth targets. And so this is what we have for the unincorporated part of Snohomish County. It's about 50,000 units. It's 50,604 to be exact. And it's broken up here in this chart by income category. And these are all percentages. They're based on the area median income. So 0 to 30%, this one here, this is both of this is includes permanent supportive housing. So this is the extremely low income households, 30 to 50% is the very low income households, 50 to 80% of the area median income, that's low income households. Then Commerce, the moderate income is actually 80 to 120% AMI, but Commerce provided it split into 80 to 100 and 100 to 120, but those together are moderate. And then above moderate or market rate housing is the greater than 120% of the AMI. So I'm sort of taking this moment to look at these numbers because what you'll see is that the majority of our housing needs that we need to plan for and accommodate are at the lower income levels. Looking at our current, as of 2020 distribution of our housing stock, like 2% of our existing housing is affordable to households making less than 30% of AMI. And then by 2044, the housing built between 2020 and 2044, if we're going to meet our 2044 need, well, that'll need to be 31% of the housing that is produced. So that's a big shift. And I would want to say a couple things about it. The first is that the county is not required to build this housing. We're required to plan for and accommodate it. And we do that through zoning to demonstrate that we have capacity, and we also do it through policy. Excuse me. And the other thing I would point out is that this has sort of matched what we've been hearing from the public about how currently the housing that we have is not meeting the needs of our residents. Like there's housing affordability is becoming more and more of an issue for more and more people, and that is pretty much demonstrated here. So that also filters through sort of our approach to policies in the rest of the housing element. So this is B. This is a statement of goals, policies, and objectives, and mandatory provisions for the preservation, improvement, and development of housing, including single-family residence, and within an urban growth area boundary, moderate density housing options, including but not limited to duplexes, triplexes, and townhomes. That last part there about the moderate density, that's been new, that's been added to this. So the housing element includes the goals and policies and objectives, as well as mandatory provisions for preservation, improvement, and development of housing. Several policies are being proposed to amended to include in consideration for those moderate density housing options. For C here, this is identifying sufficient capacity of land for housing, including but not limited to government-assisted housing, housing for moderate, low, very low, and extremely low income households, manufactured housing, multifamily housing, group homes, foster care facilities, emergency housing, emergency shelters, permanent supportive housing, and within an urban growth area boundary, duplexes, triplexes, townhomes. So there's a technical report, the Housing Needs Analysis Technical Report. Contains this land capacity analysis to meet this requirement. We have not completed it yet. We're still working on it, but between after this meeting and before your October meetings, it'll be sent with the memo. We also look at land capacity for housing as part of the environmental impact statement for the comprehensive plan. So we demonstrate looking at our growth alternatives that we got the capacity for housing. And we also are proposing to amend several policies to include these new requirements for the land capacity analysis just in our policies. D, this is adequate provisions, including, and then every little one of these Roman numerals is new. So incorporating consideration for low, very low, extremely low, and moderate income households. So there are a number of policies that are proposed to be amended to meet that. You can see in here on this table, there's a list of them there. Documenting programs and actions needed to achieve housing availability, including gaps in local funding and barriers such as development regulations and other limitations. That documentation, this is based on guidance from commerce that they have almost completed. So we're still working on that. That's part of the housing needs analysis, and we're also proposing to amend a policy to include this documentation again as part of the housing element. On the next slide here, because D is quite long. Continuing, 3, consideration of housing location in relationship to employment location. So we actually addressed this already in existing policy, but also in greater detail in the housing policies for the urban core sub-area element, since that's where we're planning for light rail. And then consideration of the role of accessory dwelling units in meeting housing needs. There are several policies that are proposed to be amended to include those considerations. Part E, this is identifying local policies and regulations that result in racially disparate impacts, displacement, and exclusion in housing, including zoning, disinvestment, and infrastructure availability. So this is a new requirement. This analysis is part of the housing needs analysis. And we have been looking at sort of historical decisions and looking at racially restricted covenants. So there's been a lot of research that we have done on this. For subsection F, this is identifying and implementing policies and regulations to address and begin to undo racially disparate impacts, displacement, and exclusion in housing. So it's a new requirement. There's a number of proposed amendments to the housing element to address those. And there's also within the housing policies for the urban core sub-area element, further policies are proposed there too. For G, this is we need to now identify areas that may be at higher risk of displacement from market forces that occur with changes into zoning development regulations and capital investments. So this is a new requirement. Information on displacement risk in Snohomish County was part of the Housing Characteristics and Needs in Snohomish County report. And proposed amendments to the narrative of the housing element include the overall displacement risk map that was from that report, just putting it in the narrative of the housing element. And it is this. This is based on the PSRC's displacement risk data. And it's a census tract level, looking at census tracts that are at the green tracts are at moderate or low risk of displacement. Households in the moderate, that's that beige color, moderate risk of displacement, and then the orange color is the higher risk. And for the unincorporated county, the majority of the moderate and higher risk tracts are right here, which is also right around the sub area, which is why we've been including policies in there as well. So the last section of this is to establish anti-displacement policies with consideration given to the preservation of historical and cultural communities. So there's a new anti-displacement objective proposed in the housing element with supportive policies, and then a number of policies are proposed to be amended to address displacement. And again, there are more anti-displacement policies within the urban core sub-area element because it is an area identified as having a higher risk of displacement. So in addition to those major amendments, we have housekeeping amendments as well. We're revising wording for more inclusive language, housekeeping amendments to improve the clarity of intent and readability, and then some renumbering. Public participation, the 30-day public comment period was the month of March this year. We received comments from Future Rise, Master Builders, Village Life Homes, and then 10 individuals. And the range of comment topics, housing affordability and availability were significant concerns. And in the public engagement that we've done just in like last summer, so outside of the 30-day public comment period, also housing affordability and availability are topics that came up a lot. We received comments or support for more housing density in different housing types, more housing choices, smaller lots, single family, tiny homes, and inclusionary zoning. We also heard comments about concerns regarding increasing density, concerns about infrastructure needs, and then the environmental impacts. And so this is one of those balancing Points or issues with the comprehensive plan. Like, we have this housing need and we need to address to accommodate, and we also need to balance that against excuse me, some of the other issues. I take a sip of tea. In the comprehensive plan. So next steps, we'll review comments received tonight, and if there might be further amendments, if those are required. All questions not answered tonight will be responded via email, and then public hearings on all of the update amendments start on October 25th. And of course, the public may continue to provide comments through our website. And that is the end of my briefing. I am available for questions.
I just want to say, Amber, it's an understatement to say that you've obviously got a lot of work and a lot of thought has gone into this, and it's very impressive. And so many new requirements, and how you get yourself through that, I don't know. But as I read these sections, it's impressive that you've done such, you and staff has just done a great job. Do we have any questions for Amber while she's here? Commissioner Pedersen.
Yeah, thank you, Amber. That was very good and very informative to hear. And I think maybe I've got more than a comment than a question. Maybe there's a question in it too. But you know, I took a little segment, just did a little math on a little piece of paper here, and I looked at the 30 to 50% income group. And I took the average there of 40% and looked at what, like at 40, what their income would be and what they would qualify for a house, right? Which is somewhere around $36,000 a year income and $77,000 mortgage. And then I took the number of houses that are going to be required and just extending out the math in that one group. This ends up being like a multi-billion-dollar lift over that period of time. So I think from the county standpoint, the obligation is more from zoning and supportive and all that. I mean, county is not paying for or building homes. But do you see from where you sit, sort of the commitment and energy from some areas for where that is all going to come from if the county becomes low income friendly? How is this all still? How does it happen? I mean, can you see that?
Right. So this is something that we brought up, has come up a number of times. Like, that's such a big number, especially for the lowest income household. That housing, it needs like such steep subsidies. How is it possible? And so what we've heard from Commerce is very much an acknowledgement that more outside funding will be needed, quite a bit of it. They acknowledge that. So what we can do is, like, there is a funding, looking at the availability of funding as part of the housing element. That is one thing that we can look at. So that is part of, like, there's a giant spreadsheet that Commerce provided that says, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have you tried this? Like, there's a whole list. So, like, basically, we know that that's a significant issue, and that we don't build houses. We just set policy and zoning. But yeah, no, we know it's a lift.
Yeah, and that's and I'm glad and I'm happy that the county is taking the steps they're taking, and I totally support this. I just see this as such a large problem that it's just going to be changing the way we do things in order to make this housing available. It's going to be very apparent in our lives because it's going to be very expensive. But thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pedersen. Any other questions or thoughts at this time? Something I've read about affordable housing is management of it, managing it. And because as you provide more and more affordable housing, what people have been finding nationally as a trend is you find assertive, determined people who are actually pretty smart and doing pretty well in their lives find ways to get into that affordable housing. And if you don't manage it, the intended audience, intended users are pushed away and kept out. That's actually happened in Everett. And it's a real concern. I guess management's really expensive. So it's just something that I hope we keep an eye on that, and we are successful in making sure that the people it's intended for actually end up benefiting from it. Commissioner Sheldon, did you have a question?
Sure. So actually, all the paperwork that you sent us is for, so it's in there for zoning, so people can do this, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Because we know the county doesn't have that lot of money, so it must come from housing, HUD housing or whatever. We're just applying the paperwork that says, yes, you could do this in this area. So basically, this is what the paperwork is for. Right.
So there's zoning is a part of like the capacity for housing, like affordable housing is more better supported with higher densities. It's just able to make projects work that way. So that's sort of that's the kind of the approach.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sheldon. Commissioner Hecht.
I think Commissioner Sievers had her hand up first.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Sievers. Thanks,
No
Chris.
no worries at all. One question and then a comment. Amber, when you say affordable housing, could you define what you mean?
Sure. So affordable housing is housing. So try to figure out the most concise way to explain it. So if for a house to be affordable to somebody making 50% of the area median income, it needs to be that they're not spending more than 30% of their gross monthly expenses on housing, so that they can find housing that they can afford that doesn't cause them to spend more than 30% of what they make in a month.
Okay. Thank you for that. Just there's a lot of different terms when we talk about housing, and I just wanted to clarify that. And then also just make a comment, when you look back 10 years, we felt that things were excruciatingly expensive to live. And here we are. It's actually not improved, right? We have more population. And when you look at the number, I think it's close to 1 million. In Snohomish County, I read this in one place where there's a significant, we don't have the supply. So there's a demand and we don't have the supply. So it drives up the cost. So I would just encourage, I know you guys work really hard at this to put policy in place, but really be thoughtful about the policy that lands so that it is a balancing act. Density, we can house more people with density, but in making those projects actually pencil out, you guys just have a lot of influence in that space, and just appreciate your hard work and keeping that in the back of your head as you really formulate and hone the policy that lands. So thank you for a great report, Amber. Great job.
Thanks, Commissioner Sievers. Commissioner Eck.
I really appreciate Commissioner Sievers' comments, just because even if we were to start now, it's just not going to be quick enough, right? So that's one thing. And then we know salaries aren't keeping pace with cost. But I guess more than anything, Amber, I want to thank you for putting this together. This was an excellent presentation, and it couldn't be more important. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Eck. Any other thoughts or comments? It's something that keeps going around the back of my head. In 1989, I was working for the city of Arlington, and the discussion about the Growth Management Act started to get real. You could see this was coming. It's back in the days when you could take a pencil and draw your growth management boundary, and we made sure we included the airport. And the thing that keeps bouncing inside my head is the original concern raised by builders was, as you limit the supply of land, you're going to push the cost up. And then what happened after the Growth Management Act passed and became law, then you started seeing pressure to limit expansion of the boundaries. It just locked down. And I've always wondered, I love rural land and I love the policy to try to preserve it. And I think the county's doing a great job of that and I appreciate it. But I keep thinking about land supply. It's the big number in the overall formula. And how we get around that, we're probably going to have to go vertical. I think might be seeing some real tall buildings here before too much longer. But it's just one of those early warnings, and we're going to live with it. It's a decision that's been made. Any other thoughts or comments for Amber while she's here? Okay, thanks very much, Amber. Great job. Can't say that enough.
Thank you.
Okay,